I'm Scott Clark. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Newport. If you don't know what city you are in, you're in Newport. This is an incredible facility. It's an adaptive reuse of the old streetcar trolley and the Green Line bus barn. So we want to welcome you to Newport. Make sure you check out our scheduled events for the weekend as well. There are programs like this out if you want to take a look. First of all, I want to thank the cities. Well, first of all, we want to thank the Heritage Council and the National Park Service for their generous grant that allow us to be able to put on Restoration Weekend. And also the City of Covington, City of Bellevue, City of Newport that helped come forward. And a special thank you to Jody Robinson, not where she is, but for all the help that she's been, and the rest of our committee as well. We have some sponsors. There's Jody. So we also want to thank our sponsors that helped make tonight and the weekend possible. And the first thing I'm going to do is thank West Banco. I should have done it. I'm sorry. And so our sponsors, as we introduce them, we're going to say a few words about their business. And so, here you go.
Well, thanks everybody for being here to learn everything about renovation and restoration. And so I just thought I would say, taking care of these beautiful homes and restoring them properly so that we can have them there for the future generations is so important. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of hard work, but it's also a lot of expense. And so my husband and I, we purchased a home on Monroe Street about a year and a half ago. It was a total gut and rehab. So I've been where you're at. And I know the process. We have a product that's specific for this. It's the purchase and renovate loan. But that's if you need to buy the house. If you already own the home, then we have, just a pure renovation loan. We have home equity lines of credit that you can use. So the bottom line is that we have a product for you. Just let us know what your needs are and what your specific situation is, and we're happy to have that conversation and help you figure out what is the best way for you to finance your dreams on these properties so that they can go into the future for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of other sponsors I want to thank is Alpi Associates. They are one of our presenting sponsors. Also, Fetters Construction, who own this facility and who are our gracious hosts for tonight. Albert, do you want to say anything?
Appreciate you guys being here afterwards. Take a look at the building. It's a passion of mine for slowly getting it back to life. Works with quite a more night. So I'll be continuing the refurbishing building brought that back to more projects we've done. Some houses in NKY and 9th Street, and the DBL law building, the Homeowners building, getting a lot of historical renovations. Appreciate you guys and join.
We've got one other sponsor that's going to talk, but I do want to encourage all of you, make sure that you try the gourmet hot dogs. They are absolutely wonderful. And partake at the bar because these folks have graciously agreed to be here and be available so that we all have something while we're listening to Bob talk, although you'll be all struck by what Bob Yapp has to say. It might be hard to drink while you're doing that. So, Eric, if you'd like to come on up, I'd like to thank Hippelman Construction Company. Eric, if you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the invite being here tonight. I'll make it short and sweet because I'm just one of the many craftsmen around the area that has a passion for renovating these old buildings. My company specializes in the box cutters and historic roofing portion, and we're just blessed to be in an area that has so many old buildings, whether it be Covington, Newport, or across the river. Definitely no lack of restoration projects. So just want to appreciate the invite to be here tonight, and love to see you in the enthusiasm from the community side. And speaking of which, we'd love to see you sign in if you are here, just so that we can get a good count on how many people came tonight and keep in touch. So, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So Eric is running the session tomorrow, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So consult the program report. Now, I'm going to introduce Christopher Myers from the City of Covington, who is going to introduce our speaker, so you won't have to listen to me talk.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming out. We are excited to be back in person for the first time in 2 or 3 years. It's awesome to feel the energy from everybody that's here today. I'm excited to welcome Bob Yapp all the way from Hannibal, Missouri. If you don't know Bob Yapp's work, check him out on PBS. Look at the Belvedere School for Hands-On Preservation. He is nationally renowned for his work in heritage trades. So we really brought a stellar person here to help us understand more about preservation trades. So without further ado, Bob Yapp.
All right. Well, I'm not going to use that tin thing, so can you hear me all right? All right. My mother-in-law always said, oh, she was half deaf, and she always said, oh, Bob, use your radio voice, you know. How many people in this audience, it's often the choir that I'm talking to, right? But be honest, how many of you would consider yourself to be preservation friendly? Raise your hand. All right. That's good. That's good. You didn't raise your hand. All right, so Chris has a pamphlet. It's a 12-step program to get over it, okay? Because everyone knows that preservation is a left-wing conspiracy to take away your property rights. I mean, we all know that. And that if you live in a local district, the paint police are going to come out and tell you what to do with the inside of your house. Of course, none of that is true. None of that is true. I've been fortunate to be involved in this industry for 47 years now. That dates me a little bit, I think. But it's been a long time. And it is the most amazing movement in the history of America because it has everybody in it. It has property rights people in it. It has lefties, righties, centeries, right of center, left. Everybody that you can think of is involved in the historic preservation movement, simply because of what I think is stuck in my mind as a young kid. So my father was a suit. He was a corporate executive. He ran a company called Ortho. You've all heard of Lawn and Garden, all that stuff. That was my dad's company. And he hated every minute of it. All he ever wanted to do was be a beekeeper, and he finally did. He retired early. But when we had this great house. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, which is the best kept secret in America, next to Covington, I think. And when he would come home on the weekends, I would do anything to hang out with him. And he was an old house weekend warrior, and he was a woodworker. I'm down in the shop with my dad. And you have to understand, my father was head of the Republican Party in Iowa at that time. He was an Eisenhower Republican. Now, some of you may not know what that means, but it's a different kind of Republican Party than what we see today. All parties have changed. I'm not trying to get into politics, but my dad was very conservative. And my mother was a feminist left-wing writer for the New York Times and the Washington Post, so dinner was always interesting at my house. My father looked at me at the bench when I was standing there with him, and he said, you know, we don't own this house. And I'm talking about this beautiful brick house, 2-story with balconies, clay tile roof, all these little alcoves to hide in, beam ceilings in the dining room, and French doors, and about 1910. And he said, we don't own this house. And I burst into tears, and I'm like, what are we moving? I don't understand, Dad. What are you saying? He said, nah. Quit crying. Go down. I'd take you down to the courthouse, and they'll tell you we own this house. But don't you ever think we own this house. That is not correct. It is our job to do quality work that lasts so the next family can enjoy this house as much as we have. And that's called stewardship, he said. And that has stuck with me. And I think I'm standing here today because he said that to me, and it really, really hit home. We need to take care of what we have, and we have not done a good job. I call it the McDonald's syndrome. We want it fast. We don't want to lift a finger. We want it cheap. And reality isn't like that. So when I was a little kid, I don't know if some of you know what a 40-foot man killer is, but that would be a wooden 40-foot ladder. And my dad, we'd climb up every spring and fall. We'd take down the storms. He had a rack for him in the garage. He had a pulley on the ladder. And I'd get in and undo the turnbuckles. And we'd wheel the storms down to my brother. And they'd clean them and put them away and put big tarp over them so they didn't get dirty during the winter. And then we'd put the screens up after we cleaned them with the hose and all this. And it was a ritual. It was a thing that we did as a family. And so often we don't do things like that as families anymore. So as I got a little bit older, I'm in high school. It's the beginning of my senior year. And I like to volunteer to build sets at the local community theater, the local community, not for profit. And I'm building a set, and a gay couple comes up that everybody knew in the theater and said, "We think San Francisco's a safer place for us, so we're leaving town. And you keep bragging about the $10,000 you saved up on your paper routes," which I had, "and we think you ought to buy our house." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm in high school, man. I can't buy your house." And they're like, why don't you follow me over there? Well, I had a 1963 Dodge Dart with a push-button transmission on the dash. I don't know if any of you remember those. And I followed them out there. And it was on the east side of town. Whoa, the east side was where that was the side of town my dad and mom always said, "Don't go over and party with those kids from East High School. They're, that's a bad side of town." And it was cool. It was I didn't even know what it was called. It was this bungalow, story and a half, with a little balcony on the front and a front porch with casement windows looking out on a park called Union Park. And later on, I found out that Teddy Roosevelt had dedicated the park when it was first done. So it had a lot of history. And there were beam ceilings like at my parents' house and all this stripy woodwork. It had all these stripes on it. I thought and it was all dark. And it reminded me of my grandmother's house in Manhattan, Kansas, where every year she wouldn't clean the woodwork, but she'd re-shellac it, and it got darker and darker and darker, right? And it was going to come with brand new lime green shag carpet. And if I bought the house, the guy said, "We'll give you the plastic rake for the carpet," because you had to rake your shag carpet back in the day. And I'm like, "How am I going to do this?" They said, "Well, we'll sell it to you for $16,000, and you give us $2,000, and then you'll have $8,000 left. You'll probably get it all fixed up and sold before you graduate." And like a dumb kid, I went, "Great, cool. All right, I'll do it." So I bought this house from these guys, directly from them, no bank. And I'm making payments. And I got my buddy Mark to come and help me out with it. And we went out, and I'm from Iowa, right? So I had to get bids to replace all the windows with Pella windows, because Pella is from Iowa. And then we got bids to put on really wide aluminum siding, because back in the 70s, in the early 70s, the wider things were, the groovier you were, if you remember this. And so we get all these bids together, and they're almost $30,000, and we're freaking out. So I go over and look at the windows, the putty's falling out, ropes are broken. And then I discovered a secret panel on the side, and I took the screw out, and there were the weights. And I thought, well, why don't we try to fix these things? We found the old storms down in the basement, kind of in a rack like my dad had done, with a little brass number on the side of each storm that corresponded with a little brass number on the jamb of each window, so we knew right where they went. We painted them all up. There was a little bit of rot on the sashes. And back in those days, there was no such thing as architectural epoxies. So I thought, let's go to the auto supply place and buy some Bondo. And we'll fix these with Bondo. Don't ever use Bondo to repair wood, for the same reason that we don't use much Bondo to restoring cars. It doesn't contract and expand with the wood. And I went back to that project years later and redid it all the way it should have been done. But it did fix the windows. Then we painted it. It had its original 1905 cedar shingle roof on it in 1973. And it was leaking badly at this point. So we put a brand new cedar shingle roof on it, because if we did that ourselves and tore off the original shingles, we were down to the space boards, and we could just put the shingles right back on. We didn't have to buy sheeting. We didn't have to do anything. And the shingles, cedar shingles were a little bit cheaper back in those days than they are today. And we got it all painted. We didn't side it. We kept the window. I didn't know any of this was historic preservation. I didn't have a clue. I just knew that it seemed right. And I called a realtor and I said, look, this is in the early spring. I said, we want to sell this house. You think you could get it sold for 35 grand? She came out and looked at it, sat us down. She said, we're going to put it on the market for 82. And I almost had to go home and change my pants. 82,000? We'd put 10 in it. And it was astonishing to me. And it sold the first day for $84,000. And we went to the bank, and this young couple with a couple of little kids were going to buy the house. They were so excited. Everybody's throwing their IDs at the closing officer. And he goes, dude, you're not 18. You can't sign a deed. I'm like, really? Oh, what do you want me to do? Well, go get your folks. I said, okay. So I walked outside and went, oh, shit. Pardon my French. Because I forgot to tell my parents that I bought this house. And my father is 6'10", and he had happened to be home that Friday when we were closing, and I went home. I said, Dad, I bought this house, and Mark and I rehabbed it. And you did what? You little liar. You told your mom you were going to the library to study, and you told her you were going to prom and dates, and you're over on the east side rehabbing some crappy old house. It's unbelievable. And I said, we paid 16, we put 10 in it, we had 26 in it, we sold it for 84. Silence. He walks up to me, he puts his arm around me. He says, you're going to be a fine capitalist boy, aren't you? And that's how I got into this. I didn't know that. There weren't a lot of people around teaching the trades back in those days, so we had to learn a lot on our own. The only thing that I could find at the library that had any relevance to what we were doing was a 3-hole punched, 8-page newsletter from this guy with a handlebar mustache out in New England named Clem Labine, and it was called The Old House Journal. Now, how many people have ever heard of The Old House Journal? It's not This Old House magazine. That would be caca. You don't want to read that. That's not good. But The Old House Journal. So today it's a huge magazine, and friends of mine are writing it, and it's an amazing magazine. But it gave me some ideas about ways to approach things. So I think it's really important. So my first book is called About Your House by Bob Yapp, and it's a treatise about how to take care of old houses. Lots of pictures, lots of drawings. People love pictures and drawings. And I'm doing a book signing down in New Mexico, sitting at a National Trust conference, sitting next to the president of the National Trust. And at the time, and this is in the early 90s, it was a guy named Richard Moe. I called him Dick Moe. Everybody else called him the Big Moe, even though he was about this tall. And he looked over at me and he said, what most of these people don't understand at this conference is that without the preservation trades, there is no preservation movement. The movement doesn't exist without the trades. And I thought, wow, here's a guy that wears a suit every day that sort of gets this. And it was really an astonishing moment for me to understand all this. So on PBS, I was able to teach the trades through PBS from 1996 to 2000. Still the highest rated home improvement show in the history of television that nobody knows about. There's like 9 people that remember. And it was called About Your House, and it was sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The difference between our show and this old this old house, was that we didn't do $1 million fantasy projects that went over budget in every single season And we didn't stay in one place all season. We traveled all over the country. So if we were looking at an artisan trades roofing company in Seattle doing a clay tile roof, we were looking at one in Florida. We were looking at one in Minnesota. We were everywhere, all over the country. At each show, I would be in a different place. And that was hard because I had to wear the same clothes. So I had to have one person tell me what to wear all the time, which is a minder, or whatever you want to call them. So that was a way to get the word out to people about practical preservation. You see, because the big lie in America today is that historic preservation is expensive. This is not true. It always costs less than new construction. There has never been one data point in anybody doing any analyzing of the preservation movement that shows that it costs more than new construction. It just doesn't. So part of the data points that Donovan Ripkema came up with that we were on Tuesday night that we talked about is he asked me some years ago, can you go back and look at what the numbers on all these 160 plus projects you've been involved in? I said, well, that's a big job. That'll take me all winter. He said, can you do it? I said, sure. So I pulled out all my records, and I have, you know those little school notebooks that you have? I have about 20 of them for every project I ever did, plus all the accounting information. So I went back through, and I was astonished, 73.2% of all my projects on average went to labor. That means very little to materials in comparison to new construction, because you're looking at 40, sometimes 50%, but averaging 40% in new construction for labor. The material costs are off the Richter scale. So that was astonishing. The other data point that he wanted me to look at was what I was spending per square foot, including acquisition. I have never been over $100 a square foot. I have never been over $100 a square foot. Now, I'm not talking about university buildings and courthouses and big civic buildings and things like that. I'm talking about high schools turned into loft condominiums, single family homes that were slumlord decimated and brought back, row buildings with party walls, all those kinds of things. Those are the types of buildings, residential living, that I've concentrated on, with some commercial built into all of them. And that's astonishing. You can't build a house. I'm getting ready to build an infill house on a vacant lot across the street from the school in Hannibal. And it's going to cost me around $200 a square foot to build a 1,500 square foot house. And that's with my crew doing a lot of the work and salvaging everything out of the building that's coming down. I've never torn a building down until now. I'm tearing my first building down. Yeah, engineering studies and the masons that I brought in. It's a brick building built in 1845, very nondescript. There's so much separation in the masonry, we had to take down 2.5 of the exterior walls at about a little under $600,000 before we start the $350,000 rehab of this structure. So you can't do it because the building's worth $400 where I live when it's done. It's just not doable. For the first time in my life, so we're salvaging all the windows that are going to go in the new house, jambs, everything. We're salvaging all the wide pine plank flooring out, it's going in the new house. All the doors inside with the transoms, all going in the new house. We're salvaging all the floor joists. We will mill the floor joists into lumber and build the kitchen cabinets out of the floor joists, as well as reproduce trim that's missing out of the house we're tearing down, because we're going to reuse all that trim in this house. And it's going to be a Gothic revival. There were 5 of them in our neighborhood that got torn down over the years, and there's no Gothic revivals left in our National Register neighborhood. So it's got a 2012 pitch on the roof. I think the shingles will last a long time on that roof. And it's got what we call lancet windows, which are pointed top like you see in churches and things like that. So the bottom line to all of this, from my perspective, is the trades. I'm here because of Christopher and the Kentucky Heritage Council. I've been working with the Kentucky Heritage Council for 20 years now. And they're one of the best SHPOs in the country. I've worked with some with the Ohio SHPO. They're excellent as well. But the Kentucky Heritage Council really understands that trades are what drive our industry. As a developer, I can't find people to do the work. We spent, I don't know how many hours Christopher and I spent going around talking to folks like Mr. Fetters here and all these different people. And we went and talked to you first thing in the morning. We wanted to talk to the small contractors, the medium, and the big boys, because we're going to craft a school here that's going to meet the needs of the community. And that's why we hired Donovan Ripkema. He's an internationally known economist who studies the economic realities of historic preservation as a part of their business out of Washington, D.C. And he was astonished at the data. And Christopher's going to be having that out for the public sometime soon, like late next week. But you've got to look at this data. It's really astonishing. Covington has some of the, as far as land mass in Covington, has one of the highest number of national and local landmark districts of any town its size in the country. And who knew, right? A scary statistic that we ran into is that I think it's 94% of everyone that's in construction in this community is white European descent. And say, 97. Well, I'm trying to be conservative, Christopher. And the African American community here is 13, 14%. Did I get that right? Okay. So we need a pipeline of people to do this work. How do we do that? Well, we have to identify all these wonderful people that don't have an opportunity to ever get into this kind of thing. And women are huge. So in the last 10 years, over half of the people that have come into the preservation trades in this country today are women. And they are kicking the men's butts. They are fabulous. I'm sorry, guys, but my classes at my school, the Belvedere School in Hannibal, half of my classes are women that have never, their fathers never maybe took the time to help them think in a handy way like they did with their sons or their brothers, you know. But once they get it, boom, they're off and running, and they want to come in, and they're young. They're in their late 20s to their late 30s, and they're coming into it. So we need to identify in this community who those people are, and we need to take those barriers and throw them in the Ohio River, because what we need is daycare, what we need is transportation. We have, in order to give somebody a foot up, not a lifelong foot up, but a foot up to get into this and get them excited about this, is we need to take some of those barriers away, and all of a sudden, we're going to see a pool of people that nobody knew existed. And that is very special. And I give Christopher all the credit for that, because his thinking on this is right down the line. And Donovan also showed some statistics that show that this is a problem everywhere in the country. So we've, the National Trust is always struggling. How do we get people of color and Latinas and different folks involved in this? And they've never been able to come up with a way. And we're coming up with a way to do it here. And we've got the wonderful sponsors in this community coming forward to be a part of this. So it really is exciting. Now, we're not doing it overnight. We're taking it step by step because we want to do this right. And sometimes, listen, I've made mistakes. I've set up lots of trade schools. I set up one in Louisville. And the problem with that one was the executive director never went out and raised any money or developed any relationships with the contractors or the developers. And so when the federal money ran out, the school just sat there and they went, no, what do we do? Well, you didn't do your job, right? So it's really important that this be a sustainable and ongoing effort. And in order to get that right, we're going to probably be bringing this out sometime in the fall. Does that sound about right? Yeah. Christopher was like, well, we're going to hit it in June. And I'm like, it's all right. We don't have to do it overnight. We're getting it. We hadn't even been on it a year yet. So anyway, I love his enthusiasm. I'd rather have somebody over-enthusiastic than under-enthusiastic. It's harder to get somebody pumped up than it is to bring them into a reality type of a thing. So you have a lot of great people in this town, and you have a lot of great structures. Oh my God. So what was the percentage of structures over 50 years old in his study? I think it was almost like 55%. And not just in Covington, but here and all over the Kentucky side, and certainly on the Cincinnati side as well. And we didn't just hang out over here. We went over and talked to developers and contractors but because they're a greater area, and we're going to serve it. We're honing on Covington, but it spreads out just by the nature of what we're doing. So, the historic preservation trades are becoming a lost art. So I learned from an 80-year-old plasterer when I was 20. Well, he's been dead a long time because I'm 66. He's been dead a long time. And I've learned from other people. When I had a full ride academic scholarship to go to the University of Iowa when I got out of high school, and I didn't show up because I had an opportunity to go to Germany and do a 4.5-year apprenticeship as a furniture designer and maker with an old German master. So the trades have been a part of my blood for all my life. So we want to drive that in this community to the point where you don't have to worry about it. One of the things that is so astonishing is windows. So we now know, I helped co-founded a national organization called the National Window Preservation Collaborative. And 4 other top preservation tradespeople and I started this. We got support from the National Trust, all the different state preservation offices around the country, the National Park Service, and we created an organization that tests windows. So now all the big window manufacturers have these in-house testers, and they test everything in a laboratory. Well, we developed a system to test in the field because that's where the reality is. And what we've discovered is that you can take an old window and make it as or more energy efficient than any replacement window on the market today. In 2019, the replacement window industry was a $9.72 billion industry. That's a big industry. You know, we throw billions around today like it's water, but that's a lot. So if you extrapolate that out, that's about 112 million window sashes that ended up in our landfills in 2019. So why does that matter? Well, the garbology study done at the University of Arizona in Tucson, it's a master's program, went around the country and core drilled all of these landfills. And Professor Rathje asked his students, so what do you think we're going to find when we get out there? We're going to bring up these cores and we're going to see, what's in these landfills. And they're like, oh, we're going to see diapers and plastic and all this kind of stuff. And 40% of what they found was demolition debris. 40% of our landfills are filled with the most precious materials that are irreplaceable in our society today. There's nothing environmentally sound about replacing things when you don't have to. And now that we know that old windows, steel casement windows, wood double hungs, wood casement windows can be made as or more energy efficient for less money, why would we do such a thing? It's a question that I think we all have to ask. Lots of well-meaning people have replaced the windows in their houses. And they're well-meaning, and I'm not trying to spank people. I'm just saying you screwed yourself. And you took something that lasted 100+ years and put it in the landfill and replaced it with something that we now know, based on that 112 million window sashes and going out to the landfills across the country and looking to see what's going in there, almost half of that 50 million plus of the windows that went into the landfills are less than 20 years old. And some of those were the second round of replacement windows. So, what we found going out and talking to all these contractors and developers is that they want to hire window restorers big time. So, you know, one of my colleagues who's been very supportive of this, who has a company called Window Woman of New England, she's probably one of the top window restoring companies in the country. She said, well, one of the biggest obstacles is shop space for people. So we're gonna have a track that will, if people wanna go into business for themselves, we'll have them go this direction. It might be masonry, it might be windows, it might be plaster, it might be flooring, it might be roofing, it might be box gutters. But whatever track that they take, they're going to go into business, and they'll have some business training to go with that. But here in the greater Cincinnati area, most of the people that are going into these trades will get hired by many of these contractors. They can't find people. It was astonishing to me how hard of a time they're having. It's not because of the economy right now or any of that. It's because there aren't people going into the preservation trades. So we have to create a buzz about this, and we're going to do that. And I think it's going to be an amazing effort. I've been in the trades all my life. I teach about 60% of the classes at my school. I used to teach all of them, and now I bring in the top people in the country. So you have somebody that's teaching stained glass in a class tomorrow or Sunday named Rhonda Deeg. She's been an instructor at my school for a long time. She will be an instructor at the Covington Academy of Heritage Trades. Just an amazing pool of people. So we'll draw instructors as much as we can from the greater Cincinnati area. We talk to you about doing something like that. And we'll talk to other people, and we talk to you guys about it. And when we can't find somebody, I just am fortunate enough to be plugged into all the top people in the country. That's what I do at my school. I bring them in. I just had Jonathan Appel come and teach a historic gravestone restoration class. Now, this is something that seemed like off track to me for my preservation trade school, but it really wasn't. I put that, Jonathan's been wanting to teach this class for about 4 years, then COVID came up and all this stuff, and finally got him in. I put that class up on the website, and it was filled within days. And people came from Oregon, and people came from Maine and Texas and Colorado to take this class. And all the classes I teach, we get the same thing. So we're hoping to draw as many people in the local community as possible, but you'd be surprised at how many people around the country are clamoring for it, because there used to be quite a few two-year trade schools, maybe a handful or so, around the country that taught the historic preservation artisan trades. Belmont is still going, but is struggling. And right now, the only artisan trade guild in this country that exists today is called the Preservation Trades Network, is having their annual international conference in Ohio at that school. But they're struggling. So what do? People don't come into this out of high school. Although I have to tell you, we should be having these programs in every high school. Right now, they're doing home building courses in high schools. And they've got some engine, motor repair and some computer type voc tech things. But they got rid of so much of voc tech. Some pointy-headed academics in the late 60s and early 70s said, we have to make sure that everybody goes to college, which is total garbage. We need people in the trades. It's a great living. And the other thing about great living that Donovan discovered is that people in the preservation trades make more money by as much as 5 to 10% than people in the same trades in new construction. So there's a little bump for that information and that skill set, which I think is really good. So I was going to be a shop teacher at one point in my life, and I got into that program, and they started 86ing all the voc tech programs, and I went, well, I got to go do something else. And it's very, very, very sad. But if we start them in high school, we can identify people right away that really aren't going to go to college. So when I got to Hannibal, Missouri, I noticed all these 14 and 15-year-old kids roaming the streets during school. So I went to the superintendent, and I said, what's up with that? She said, oh, well, this is Mark Twain land here in Hannibal, Bob, and those are our huck fins. and we can't do anything with them. I'm like, what do you mean you can't do anything with them? Well, you know, they come from the worst families. The girls have been raped by their uncles, and they're all in the juvie justice system, and they're just rascals, and we just nothing we can do. And I said, well, that's crazy. We're going to start a program. You're going to sign a contract with my school. We're going to start the Historic Preservation Trades program. We're going to get all these dropouts back in school. We're going to take the at-risk kids that learn differently, that are still just barely hanging on in school, and we're going to get them in this program. So we went to the Voc Tech guy, and we were all excited. The principal and the superintendent and I were all excited about this. And he looked at us and he said, I don't want those crappy kids in my program. I don't want anything to do with it. We said, fine. Principal and the superintendent said, well, just work with Bob's school and we'll just do it. And you don't have to have anything to do with those. He didn't use the word crappy. It starts with an S, kids. So we did this, and we ran it for 6 years, and half girls, half boys. And we graduated 160 kids in 6 years that would have never graduated from high school. And they all graduated with a state certificate in historic preservation trades. And it changed their lives. Now, not all of them went in. It's about a 30%, a little over 30% of those kids went into the trades at some level. The difference is that if you're in a home building program in a high school, first of all, you're building houses. So you're going to be laid off for half your life, number one, because the home building, right now they're talking about backing off on home building. And so, but if you're in the historic preservation trades, you are never unemployed. When the times get tough, people stay in their homes, they have to fix their homes, they have to do repairs and those kinds of things. And if you know these trades, then you have a foot in the door. Most of the people that I know, small companies with an owner and anywhere from 2 to 10 employees, are 2 to 3 years booked out in advance. We need that to come back down to 6 months because we need competition. One of the things that gives preservation a bad rap when it does cost a lot, like it does on this old house, plus that's not preservation. You all understand that this old house has nothing to do with preservation. They throw more stuff away. The first show that we did for PBS, this old house had gone on to Barnstable, Massachusetts on Cape Cod and just trashed the preservation ordinance and trashed the commission because they wanted people to keep the character defining features on the outsides of their historic houses. It never goes inside, it's always outside. So we went there for our first show and we showed how collaborative and how wonderful the ordinance is and how great the process is. And boy, did we tick them off. They were mad, and that was fine with me. That doesn't bother me one bit. So these high school kids, I'll give you an example. 2 girls in the class wanted to go and get jobs. So I got them a job with a historic property developer in St. Louis, which is about an hour and a half south of us. Most of the kids that I find in these rural communities, and it may be this way here as well, have never left the county. They want to stay close to their families. Now, that's not the way I was raised. My family on both sides, you grow up, you learn either your trade or you go to college, and you go wherever you have to get your career going. But it's a little different. So these girls go down to St. Louis, they work for this guy for several years, and they start a company called Two Broads, and they are doing work all over St. Louis. And it's really, really great to see. So that is really important. If we can get to kids in high school, that's a great place. We're going to be working with kids coming out of high school, young adults. People don't have time to go to a 2-year college and take out $60,000 in loans to get a preservation trades degree. It's just not a reality anymore. So what we've discovered both with my school and other areas is that workshop-based training is the best way to go. So just to give you an example, so if somebody gets a job as a laborer for one of the big companies, and that company says, okay, you're working for me for 3 weeks, and then we're going to pay you, but you're going to go to the Covington Academy of Heritage Trades 5 days a week for every month for 12 months, and then they get out and they have competency and they can come into a little better job. They're not journeymen, but they come into a little better job within the field that they're shooting for. But they also have to learn that a lot of companies want you to be a bit of a generalist. So you're gonna, like if you pick painting, or if you pick windows, you're gonna learn how to paint, you're gonna learn how to do wood repairs, you're gonna learn how to use all the tools and all that kind of thing. So that person has this experience in windows for that contractor, but they also have other that spread out from that. So, anybody have a question about anything that I've talked about here? Does this seem reasonable to you? Or you're all looking at me like going, All right, no questions. Yes, ma'am.
So, how is their pay gonna be structured? I mean, like, will they be getting something above what minimum wage is at that time? Or, I mean, you know, what are the contractors willing to pay for these kids?
So the preservation-oriented contractors, based on our discussions with them and Donovan's study of the area, are showing that entry-level jobs are $20 an hour. And that journeymen are making $35, and that's a range. So that's, well, a lot better than minimum wage. And so that's kind of exciting from that perspective. I think it's an excellent question. Anybody else? All right.
How do you become a part of this?
How do you become a part of this? You contact this fellow over here, and his name is Christopher Meyer.
I'll ask a question. As a historic homeowner, how does this academy affect me if I'm trying to find someone to work with?
Well, that's a huge segment. So as I travel around the country and then working here, what we find is that property owners can't find people to do the work cost effectively either. If we don't have competition, it's interesting because you can go into a community in the Midwest and there'll be one major preservation contractor, right? And there's no competition, so they can charge you whatever they want. Or you're gonna hire this guy who's gonna learn Preservation 101 on your job, and good luck to you, right? Because you follow behind, you know what I'm talking about. We follow behind people that don't get it, and we have to fix their work all the time, and homeowners are very upset about it. So they should be, because we have not done our job in the preservation movement to provide the kinds of skill training that's necessary to make this just regular stuff, because that's really what it is. It should be just regular stuff in so many ways. All right, thank you all for having me. I'll be doing a talk at 9 o'clock in the morning called Alternative Materials, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And we'll be talking about what works and what doesn't work and that kind of a thing. So I hope you all come. Thank you. What are you, Jimi Hendrix?
There we go.
He's Jimi Hendrix of Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's just my style too. So, first of all, thank you, Bob, for that great talk. You know, it's incredible to see people in the field, you know, who have been in it for a few years. But Northern Kentucky, River Cities, even Cincinnati, we have a great preservation ethic here. And, you know, you can just see by when you drive down the streets, well, the reason you all are here is because of this incredible landscape that we have of all these incredible buildings, and many of them haven't reached their full potential. And the most important thing is you know, those of us that own a historic building, guilty, by the way, you know, we're just the stewards. So we need to do a good job to make sure that these buildings are here for the next generation. So thank you all for coming. Pick up a brochure and make sure you check the classes for tomorrow and Sunday. By the way, you were enjoying Rick's gourmet hot dogs tonight. Tomorrow at the Taste and Talk, we will have food from across the River Cities that is complimentary with your complimentary registration. So what else can we do to get you to come? So anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the committee that got everything going here. And I think we have a little more time if you want any more drinks or more food. But they are going to toss us out because they have other people coming too. So anyway, thank you very much.